Hello and welcome to the Lean In Lift Up podcast. I'm Nicole Martin, a Master of Social Work student at Cal Poly Humboldt. I live in and work on the unceded land of the Cholula, Hupa, Karuk, Matol, Tolowa, Sunungwe, Wiyot, and Yurok people currently known as Humboldt County, California. I strive to approach this podcast with humility and respect while navigating all topics. I'm delighted you're joining us as we delve into the vital world of child welfare. In today's episode, we're diving into a topic that is often complex and nuanced: dual relationships in rural communities. In rural and Indigenous communities, the lines between professional and personal can blur quickly, especially for social workers who are deeply embedded in the community. Whether it's a neighbor, a friend, or a family member, dual relationships are almost inevitable. But how do we navigate them ethically and effectively? To help us unpack this, I'm excited to welcome Christina Cafferata. Christina is a social work student and is currently interning at Humboldt County Child Welfare as part of her Bachelor of Social Work program. Christina has a wealth of experience in both rural and community-based roles. She's worked at family resource centers in Humboldt and Siskiyou counties, ran a family daycare, and was a unit director for the Boys and Girls Club of Humboldt. Christina's unique perspective bridges the worlds of child welfare, education, and community services, making her insights invaluable for today's discussion. Christina, thank you for joining me.
Hey, thank you, Nicole.
Yeah.
Quite the introduction there.
Well, you are quite an impressive
One thing
person.
that you didn't add into that I think is important to include as well is I was also the administrator superintendent at a rural elementary school in Siskiyou County, which was on the Karuk tribal lands.
That's right.
And I was there for like 8.5, almost 9 years.
That's awesome. So, just to jump right into it, you've spent years working in rural and community settings, and now you're interning at Humboldt County. In these spaces, the relationships you form with families and communities are often much more personal than they would be in larger urban areas. What do dual relationships mean to you in the context of child welfare, and why are they so prevalent in these communities?
In my current internship, I have had a few instances where maybe I might encounter reports because I'm working in the court unit, and sometimes I will encounter reports that have names of people that I know, out in the community or on a personal level, and in terms of like how that has like impacted, I think it's just important that we just try and find ways to keep it as separate as possible, even when, inevitably when you work at child welfare, even as an intern, people know you are there and they kind of feel like, oh, this is going to be like a inside source for information. And I think it's just like being able to have like really good clear boundaries as to like, that's like a no-go subject, and also like not even like that we're not talking about it, but it's also that that questions aren't going to be asked just because I have like those boundaries, before they even get brought up, because I think some of us have like, it's really hard to do like a deadpan face. Our facial expressions can give away a lot, and so I think that I've just been like really good about just setting boundaries with friends and family and coworkers and colleagues and stuff about just making sure that it's not even something that's going to come up. I had at the beginning of the semester, in one of my classes, another student at a different intern location was talking about a client, and I realized through some of the things that they were saying that was a client that we had in common, and they had approached me after class, not realizing that family was involved in child welfare, but they had approached me like, hey, I know you used to work in a family resource center. What would you say if you had, if you were in my situation with this particular client? And so I did my best to just give her information on what I felt like I would be offering as a case manager in a resource center, but also like trying to just like put in the plug-in of like have them, work with their case managers, whether it be you or whoever else they are working working with, um, being open and honest about what their situation is so that they can get the support that they need. But beyond that, I had to just kind of like really practice being really cautious about like making sure that even my facial expression didn't say, "Oh my gosh, I know who you're talking about," because you know, it's confidentiality is important. Everywhere you live, confidentiality is important, but especially in rural communities where everybody knows everybody, and I should say, thinks that they should be entitled to know everybody's business, and it just can be really damaging.
Absolutely, yeah. And then you had touched a little bit on it, but like what do those boundaries look like, and like how do you maintain them with people in the community?
With um, certainly like with my other students who are interning in other settings, they've been curious like what types of things I do in my role, and I've been I'll just generalize, like, as opposed to being like, yesterday I had this case that da da da, like it just is, because even just saying something really casual like that is enough sometimes to like tip somebody off as to something that's going on with somebody they know, or something they read on Lost Coast Outpost, or their neighbor or their friend, or whatever, and it's just not even worth breaking that confidentiality with other people. So I just have always just been like, we get a lot of cases that are, people who are struggling with various forms of addiction, or, just kind of generalizing along that way. Or I'll say, like a lot of the referrals we get are, related to people who are struggling who also need resources, whatever that might look like. But I'm really pretty, aware of just, even if it's like some people have this way of like communicating, and they're like, they're your friends, so they're trying to like, ask more questions and inquire more, and it's just really, it's it's important, I think, that we just kind of set good, strong professional boundaries from the get-go, so that the conversation doesn't get past that point, because it's like once you accidentally leak out just a teeny tiny bit of information, it just has too much potential to cause harm to a person, or to an agency, and it just is not worth going there. And also it like breaks your own integrity.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. While you were talking, I was thinking too about like how we're able to talk about the work that we do with our people, because we can't, contain it all the time. Like that's not feasible to ask any person.
Yeah.
And I know that like we all have our different strategies, I guess. So like what strategies do you use to be able to talk about your work while still maintaining confidentiality for like clients and coworkers?
You know, one of the things that I have really appreciated during, excuse me, one of the things that I've appreciated about our internship at Child Welfare currently is that each week we have um, they call it like the group supervision, and along with like some cultural coaching. I think that one of the things that I have most appreciated is being able to sit in a room with other fellow interns and colleagues, to be able to bounce ideas off of each other, or maybe decompress or ask questions, if we are working on a particular case that is a little challenging, or maybe we're confused about or struggling with internally, like, oh, I saw something, or I heard something, I read something that has, bothered me, or made me feel a certain way, or made me curious about why it's being handled this way and not that way. So I think that being able to like utilize that has been a great source of being able to like decompress, and then also like pause and reflect, get support, reaching out to coworkers or supervisors, is something that I think is really important. And then also, like, years ago, I was an AmeriCorps member. I did the 8-factor AmeriCorps program with the different family resource centers in Humboldt County. And during those 3 years that I was doing that, we had what was called process group. And so each week we would all come together, and all of the 8-factors, and we would sit in a room, and like basically like what's said in the room stays in the room. And it gave us an opportunity to, talk and share and be able to decompress in a professional setting, so that, it made it so that, it was kind of like almost like group therapy, but with a bunch of social workers that were talking about things that were kind of challenging in their sites, and things that they needed support with, or things that they wanted to share that they were really excited about, success stories with families, things like that.
That's wonderful that like you were able to have that space, and that space was provided for you to be able to
Yeah.
have that like debriefing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the like group supervision continues to happen after an internship level at the county, like in different roles that we might have in future work opportunities with the county. But I imagine, even without that, like, you're building relationship with your coworkers and your supervisors, and there's a lot of people with just a tremendous amount of experience, and we're not alone in it. And just being able to reach out to a coworker and be able to, say like, what's this, what can we do with this, or what should be done with this information. And sometimes just saying it once is just enough to like decompress. And other times people I see, like, there's been particular cases over this last term that, that I can tell like have kind of gotten under the skin of certain people. And it's hard when you're working with people, and that what they're going through is hard and heavy, and it's intense. Like, it impacts people. So there is definitely like the potential to carry that home and feel it, but being able to like find healthy ways to be able to talk about it within a trusted circle. Like, you're never alone in your particular role in like child welfare, for instance, or I'm sure it's the same in like behavioral health or in family resource centers, or schools, for instance. There's teams of people that are working collaboratively to support a family. It's important that you aren't just like the one-man show, which I think can be hard sometimes in really extremely rural communities, where literally you are a one-man show sometimes and having to like wear a lot of different hats. But I think that that's one of the things that I most appreciate about working, even though this is like rural in Humboldt County. It's still like a pretty decent sized town, and there's a lot of coworkers, so there's a lot of people to bounce ideas off of that are going to be in the same unit or the same team or working with the same family, so that it's not just all on your shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, my next question for you then is like, how do you manage those relationships when you're working with families where personal connections might overlap?
It's happened in my role with, in my current internship, as well as like in the family resource centers or the schools. It's like, we've had, times that I've seen it happen where, like, as an AmeriCorps member who had accidentally like accepted friend requests from some of the kids in the family resource centers that they had worked in, and realizing quickly that that wasn't the best thing to do. Like, they should have like created a little Facebook group or a group session to like connect that was separate from their own personal thing, because suddenly all those kids had access to all their photos and all the festivals that they had gone to. And maybe they might have had bought a case of beer or whatever and were barbecuing. And in class the other day, one of one of the students in our class was talking about how, he had been at the gas station. He works in a school setting, and he is plenty old enough to be able to go buy a 6-pack of beer to be able to bring home and barbecue with his buddies. But he said he was buying a 6-pack of beer and turned around, and one of the kids that he worked with in his school setting was there, like, watching him buy beer, and he was like, I almost felt kind of embarrassed and like kind of guilty, and like, it's silly, but it's also not, because we are, depending on the type of relationship, like, we had talked about it in class, like how that might look if it was somebody who was like a sponsor for AA, versus, a teacher or somebody who worked in a school setting, or, we're people too, but we also, like,
Right.
are like trying to, like, not like look like we're just partying it up on the weekend, with our, with our clients. So
Yeah, it's
and then in the rural community that I lived, it was really difficult because, it was a community of most of the people that had lived out there had all known each other from the time they were born, and here we are, like, in our 40s or something, and so, like, everybody who worked at the school had kids at the school, also, got together on the weekends or in the evenings, and they did all kinds of activities together, and some of it was stuff that, for some of the people involved, was a little questionable, like, in terms of, like, what would be considered ethical practice, but it was also like cultural norms. So yeah, it just is a little different.
yeah.
When you're looking at that, or like being invited to birthday parties when you work in a family resource center, in a small area, and they're teens that you work with every day and you build relationships with, and you want to support, but it's like, gosh, if you go to one person's birthday and then deny the next birthday, like, how is that going to feel to everybody? And so it's like always kind of like a fine line of, like, what do you do, what don't you do?
Yeah. Like, that's such a hard thing because you don't want to appear that you're choosing favorites.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also hard because we are public figures, whether we mean to be or not.
Yeah.
And we can't control other people's perceptions of us, and yet we still have to try to live our lives at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult balance to try to figure out, and it takes time too. Like, it's not something that you're going to perfect in your first year.
No. And even if you've been doing it for 20 years, you're still, like, trying to navigate and figure out how to make that work. There's always something more that you can gain, by hearing what other people's experiences were, and even if you have figured out, like, oh, maybe I won't be going to that particular event because all of my clients that I'm, struggling with right now are going to all also be at that same, you know, community event. Other times it's like, yeah, we're going to go and we're going to build relationship, and they'll get a chance to see us in a different light. And sometimes it's not always a bad thing, and other times it's like, oh, we're going to give each other a little space, and who needs this event more? Like, will my presence being there, impact this person in a way that is going to be uncomfortable? And maybe it's like a cultural experience that's really important to them to gain from being there, and I'm feeling okay right now, so I'm going to just stay home or not necessarily go to that particular event. Or maybe I'll go, but I will only stay for an hour, so that way, they have space to be there without feeling like I'm going to be observing from the sidelines, like the types of things that, they wouldn't necessarily want me to be witnessing, which is hard in a small community.
Yeah, it definitely can be. Like I know I've ran into previous clients before at community events, and
Mm,
so far they've all been very pleasant. Like they've been, families and parents that we had a good relationship, a good working relationship.
yeah,
But I'm really fearing and worry about the day where I have a working relationship that doesn't go as well, and then we run
yeah,
into each other at Winco or Big Time or
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That was one thing that was really, really hard in a rural setting. At one time, I had to make a child welfare report, and it went south real fast
Mm,
because there had been like a, I want to say like a leak as to who it was that had shared the information. Somehow they had known or strongly suspected that I was involved in some way, and it turned into like some pretty real scary threats. And that is hard when you're in a rural community and like still trying to like work and support their family, but you are also like a long ways out from law enforcement if you need it,
mm-hmm.
and like how do you clue people in that you need help or support unless you have like a network of coworkers that are like, aware. And
Right.
so for the most part, it's all been, good in terms of the families and that's the one thing that I think will happen is like you'll run into the at Costco or Winco or at Big Time or something, and some of them are people that I knew from 30 years ago, back when they were little kids at Boys and Girls Club, and they're all grown up now, or others are people that I worked with in a family resource center, and I wait for them to approach me first. I will look at them and smile or whatever and acknowledge, but just because you just don't know for sure, like, you don't want to break confidentiality, but you also want to see them as a person and know that they mattered. And so, but almost every time I've run into somebody out in the community that I knew from past working experience have been like so excited, and they like will like run up and give you a hug and just be like super eager to share like that their life turned out really good and that somehow they attributed, even though it had really nothing to do specifically with me, they wanted to like share it like as if I had been like a role in that. And I think it was more of like just giving them confidence that they actually had it in within them all along. And they just
Mm-hmm.
needed to like have somebody like be there to support and encourage and pray, like praise them or whatever it was that kind of like got them to see that they could put one foot in front of the other and make different things happen for themselves. And so it's always really cool to years later run into somebody or have them reach out and just be like, hey, things turned out okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I love to hear that.
Yeah.
I think this
those are the
kind of
those
like
are the types of things that I think social workers like we all always or teachers, whoever it is, anybody who works with anybody, you form relationships with people, and there's certain people that you're always going to kind of wonder like, you might be involved in their life for just a minute.
mm-hmm.
Other times it might be a year or two or longer, especially in a rural community where you support people in different capacities. But it's always fun to be able to like reconnect years down the road with people that you've seen like go through things and come out and just be like super happy and self-actualized, and it's fun to
A-
see.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that that's, at least for me, that's one of the things that keeps me doing the work, is just seeing when the outcomes are good and just knowing that they do
Mm-hmm.
exist.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah. What advice would you give to social workers or people working with social workers going into this kind of work, whether they're like just beginning or navigating rural communities for the first time?
I think it's really important in rural communities, like in some rural communities, like Siskiyou County comes to mind. There there is a lot of need, but not as many resources as like say Humboldt County, even though Humboldt County for certain things has a lot of resources, but there's also a lot of people who need them. So I think that one of the things to me, when you're working in rural community is like know what's out there, know what's available, know the process of like how to access those supports, know who is working there so that you can do like a, hey, I want you to reach out to my friend Sherry, who's down at the FRC, and she will be able to help support you. And know that Sherry is actually going to be there when you say she will be, and actually have the resources available so that you're not just sending people on dead ends of like false hope. And also just like networking, like know, even if it's not necessarily like, for instance, like we are doing child welfare, it's still really important to be aware of things that are happening with the elderly communities or with disabled communities or in AOD programs or all these different areas, mostly because these are things that our families are going to, struggle with. All of a sudden a family is going to be like, encountering some hardships because maybe, one of their grandparents has taken a health turn for the worse, and they're, under stress trying to figure out, what's available, what resources are out there. And I think the more knowledgeable we are about the different programs, or like, for instance, with child welfare, we make a lot of referrals or suggestions for like AOD programs, for instance. And I think like just knowing, or housing, like knowing that the lists of resource and referral options that we're handing out are actually still in business, and whether or not they have openings or how hard it is to actually get in, and those sorts of things are, I think, important.
Yeah, I've definitely, in my experience over the last 4 years, having integrity with your word is really important in our communities, because we do run into each other, whether that's in a professional capacity or in community. Like, people are going to remember whether or not you kept your word and you did what you said you were going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or whether or not your referral helped them, instead of it just being like running on a hamster wheel that goes nowhere and just a bunch of dead ends. So just like really knowing what's out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And following through. If you say, like you said, your integrity, you say you're going to do something, you need to figure out how to do it. Don't make promises that you can't keep. In fact, don't make promises at all, just because it's like a way to like inevitably shock yourself when you realize like, oh, that was actually a dead end. Like, that's not going to happen because that program is no longer in existence.
Yep. And being able to keep yourself accountable when you are wrong and apologize for it.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
Find a way to make up for it.
Absolutely.
There have been several times that I have had to apologize to a family for incorrect information or going back. And what's important about that is that we're human. We're allowed to mess up, but following through and making good on your mess ups,
it's critical,
is invaluable. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with me. I always appreciate our conversations.
Yeah, for sure. It was fun.
And
thank you. Sorry for my hoarse voice. I guess that's one thing about like doing social work, is that the commitments that you have still happen.
Yes.
Whether or not you're feeling great or not. And I will say, like, that was one of the downfalls of like working in really, really extremely rural areas is sometimes we are like one person that's wearing a lot of hats. And if we, are having an off day or are like super sick, it's like that impact is like really felt. So like trying to find ways to like get more people on your team and involved with a network of people that can like be helpful and like surround yourself with colleagues that can also like show up, is like super important.
Yeah, definitely.
So sweet. Well, thank you, Nicole, for having me, and I will touch base with you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope you're able to recover. If you found Christina's insights helpful, share this episode with someone who might benefit from it. And remember, as social workers, we're all learning together, supporting one another, and navigating these complex dynamics with care. This is Lean and Lift Up, and we'll see you next time.